All right. HIP-920. What's it all about? What's going on? And why is it important? So HIP-920. What is a HIP, first of all, just for people, listening that might be excited about music, metadata and all that kind of stuff, might not know like what I mean by HIP. So HIP stands for Hedera Improvement Proposal. It's this, albeit, sometimes complex system, but it is a system in which anybody that uses Hedera or anybody who is aware of Hedera can have an idea of what they'd like to do, get that idea out there to the development community on GitHub, right? And GitHub is kind of a website where most of the software that you use, most of the websites that you visit, they're developed on GitHub, from your Apple iPhone to your Google Android to, any website. So GitHub is really where a lot of development happens. So you get your idea, throw it into GitHub, and you form a consensus around it, right? You try to get people involved, you get the idea moving, then you make a formal HIP, which is like this big document that has like an abstract and all these different types of things. You outline whatever you're trying to do, you submit that, and then it just goes through these stages, and then it eventually gets approved. And then on hips.hedera.com is where you can see all the approved HIPs, all the upcoming ones, including, the airdrop HIP that we talked about last week and different things like that. And one of those HIPs is called HIP-920, and the numbers basically are connected to those conversations on GitHub, essentially. So HIP-920 is it's a HIP that took a bit of a different approach, and one that kind of has been taken a little bit. I'd say about a year ago, there was a group that was started by myself and Patches and a few other community members. Patches is listening right now. Shout out Patches. This HIP wouldn't exist without Patches and this group. So the Hashgraph NFT working group is a collaborative group of builders on Hedera that want to do cool music stuff. And the vision of that group is, of course, it's the Hashgraph NFT working group. It's for NFT stuff on Hedera. But initially, what was important is to go, well, what's a big problem that needs to be solved right now? And a big problem that had to be solved was music metadata standards, right? And music metadata standards are so important because with an NFT, the metadata of your NFT is like the DNA of it, right? It's this little bit of code that tells what's inside the NFT, what does it do, where are those things that are inside of it? And then when you're using an application on Hedera, like let's say a wallet or a launchpad or a music player, like what's the title of the song? How long is the song? What are the lyrics? Who's the song by? Is there any other data out there on the internet that I have to connect with? So that set of instructions, that metadata, is so important. And we solved this problem before in a really big way with HIP-412, right? Which was metadata standards for any NFT. And it was kind of this one size fits all. And it basically unlocked the ecosystem that we have now. Standards are so important. And they're important because everybody has to be speaking the same language, right? If you're a creator making an NFT, or if you're a marketplace, or if you're a wallet, you all have to agree upon what things are called inside the NFT, like how, what's an image called, or where do we put the title? Does an NFT have a description? How do we put multiple files in there? And because it's code, you all have to work on it together and agree on it. So that way everyone's speaking the same language. And when you have a HIP that goes out there on the Hedera website, it makes it official. It gives you something to point to. So that way builders and creators in the future can go look at it and say, here's how I do that thing. And then they become compatible with everything. So standards are so important. And the music industry for decades has depended on metadata. And a great example of this is if you've ever, a great example is if you've ever gone on like, LimeWire or Pirate Bay or something like that and downloaded an MP3 for your favorite band, right? You drag that MP3 into iTunes or back in the day, like Winamp or like whatever it might be. And then from that little single MP3 file that has like maybe like a weird file name, and you bring that into your music player, like magic, it's like, boom, it knows the artist name, it knows the album, it knows the year it was released, it knows the copyrights, all that kind of stuff. And that's all information stored in metadata in that MP3 file. So we're not really reinventing the wheel with HIP-920. Basically what this HIP is about, what these music metadata standards are about is, you know, onboarding the music industry to Hedera, right? Making it possible for all the work that they've been doing for all these decades to work properly on Hedera. And further than that, use little connectors that exist in the music industry, like ISRC codes or UPC codes that you'll find on the back of a CD, or like, you know, as part of like an, you know, Apple Music or Spotify streaming or whatever. Put those in the NFT too, so they can call existing databases that Spotify uses. Like, build these connections, make this stuff possible. That was the beautiful thing about HIP 412, the original standards, is there was this kind of undefined area in those metadata standards called properties, which is where you can just kind of put a bunch of stuff. And that's what this HIP-920 is about, is it's saying for music, this is the stuff we need. And so HIP-920 was just published on, I think it was, yeah, it's moving so fast. It was just published yesterday on GitHub. And I want to give people a bit of a walkthrough, kind of like, how do you actually use this stuff? Because I find that for people who aren't developers, it's really difficult to get involved in this stuff. So how do you get involved with HIP 920? So there's a thread that was shared by the Hashgraph NFT working group on X. Give them a follow. I'm a part of that working group. Patches is a part of that working group. Tons of really great members of that working group, including, you know, TuneFM, Seekey, Hashpack, NFTs, Swirlds, you know, my agency with Josh, Dirksen and Davenport, Turtle Moon. So there's so many different members of this, Vasizi as well. And the working group isn't just developers, right? It's artists and music industry people too. This is a standard made by artists for artists. Let's go into it and see what it looks like. So this is GitHub. This is kind of like the HIP of where it is. This page here is kind of where it lives. And as you can see, some folks are providing feedback, maybe some potential changes. This one's for lyrics. This one's for reducing redundancies with track data. So there's like conversations happening here. And this on GitHub is called a pull request. This is basically the NFT working group saying, hey, here's our idea. We've got it ready to go. We want to merge it into the Hashgraph. And before we do that, let's have a conversation about it. So we're making a request. It's a pull request is what's it called on GitHub. And this is what the HIP will look like on the Hedera website. So if I go to the Hedera website here, HIP-920. So this is what the HIP looks like, right? We've got the author and working group, the status, all those different types of things. And then here's the actual written content of the HIP. So like, as I was saying, as standards, right? So this is explaining what the HIP is about. Why was it made? How would someone use it? What's the specification, right? A lot of this technical kind of stuff, an example of how it works. So I was talking about a code snippet, right? So here's how that actual code snippet works and how it looks. So this is it right here. This is an example that you can use to run your own experiments and see if there's any problems with the standards that you want to help correct before it gets finalized, and a bunch of other info. So that's what a HIP looks like. That's kind of what the process is and where this group is coming at it from. And really the next question is like, so what's next? Like, where are we at right now? What do the next steps look like? And I would say, right now, 8 months of work is accomplished by tons of really smart people, on this HIP. And where we're at right now is where the group is showing that work to the whole Hedera community with the hope of saying, find problems with this, break this, experiment with this standard, and let us know your thoughts. Let us know how we can make it better. So if you have ideas on how we can make it better, or if you just have ideas for new things to try, go on GitHub. If you don't have a GitHub account, make one. It's really easy. And go in there, join the discussion, make those suggestions. You can actually edit the files, right? And it'll show your edits. And if they're good, they can just be added. So really, GitHub's a really great tool for that. It can be a bit of a learning curve. And it is difficult, I think, for the broader community to be involved in this process. I mean, being real, it's like GitHub is hard to learn for a lot of people. So what I will say is a great way to get involved is reach out to the Hashgraph NFT working group on X, comment on that Twitter thread, send DMs to that account. We want to meet people halfway as well in the group. We want to make sure every voice is heard. So if you're not a developer, you don't quite have the hang of it, you don't feel quite comfortable, that's fine too. Share your ideas on X, share your ideas with the group. And yeah, the goal is just to keep people updated. And the next step here looks like a couple of weeks, right? We're not in a huge rush here. The work's been done. We want to give the community time, right, to give this a look over and share their thoughts. And maybe there's some objections or debates that have to happen. That stuff is super important. So, and I mean, also as well as the author of the HIP, feel free to DM me or message me or any ideas like that. My job as a HIP author and kind of the role of a HIP author, it's kind of a formality. I don't want people to, the one thing I want to avoid is people seeing this as kind of like maybe my HIP or something. It's not. My name as an author is literally just a technical formality. The role of the author is just to make sure that conversations can happen, that information's organized, and that the requested changes get done, that we can form consensus. That's all I'm doing. It's the NFT working group that made this HIP. Me being an author is just a formality of pushing it along. So if you see a HIP author, they're the person to reach out to in regards to that. So just huge shout out to the Hashgraph NFT working group. Check that stuff out. And yeah, I think the future, what this looks like is more music on Hedera, the music industry being able to onboard into Web3, and people being able to create music that's also compatible elsewhere on other networks as well. And also too, making it so all the great music that's already been created by artists out there, that's already up on Spotify and Apple Music and maybe available as CDs in a store or something somewhere, essentially it makes it possible for them to port all of that stuff over to Hedera without having to duplicate everything. So it's just about opening doors, making things possible, and also too, making it so wallets and marketplaces and music platforms can finally get started. Because if you're not speaking the same language, if there isn't those standards, it's really hard for people to get started. So this removes blockers. Let's get it done. And just thrilled to have it out there. And another huge shout out to all the amazing hard work by the Hashgraph NFT working group. Super stoked. I love it. I want to talk now about INOs. Lots and lots of discussion in the community. We've got clarity now. And I think the huge benefit here is we've learned so much, which is amazing.